Everyone. I'm excited to today be hosting a week without driving lessons from community organizers. My name is Marley Townsend, and I'm the communication specialist for the League of American Bicyclists. If you've joined our webinar series before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, welcome in. Thank you all so much for joining us and taking the time to tune into this really important conversation today. Before we dive in, just a couple of quick reminders that this session is being recorded. It will be sent out to the email address that you signed up with, and it will also be added to our YouTube channel and our webinar archive at bikeleague.org/webinars. Closed captioning is available, and you can activate that at any time through your Zoom window. Look for a little button that says CC. And finally, a reminder that all attendees have their microphones muted, but we would love, some good engagement. So if you'd like to share where you're tuning in from and maybe network with fellow attendees, the chat is a great place for that. And we also would love to hear any questions you have, and panelists will answer them during the Q&A panel at the end of the session. So just a quick second to talk about the League of American Bicyclists if you're new. So the League is the nation's oldest grassroots bike advocacy organization. We originally started out advocating for the first paved roads in the 1880s so that cyclists and all people on wheels could ride more safely. And to this day, we are still leading in the bike advocacy space. Our mission today is to lead the movement to create a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. And we're really excited to have you in the audience today as part of that movement, making biking better and more accessible. And especially considering it is Disability Pride Month, I'm really excited to bring this topic to y'all today. The Week Without Driving is a really meaningful opportunity for people to experience all the barriers that non-drivers have to navigate every day. And I think this aligns really beautifully with our mission and our approach, amplifying the voices of people like the leaders that you'll meet, and the advocates across the country. We really want to support and showcase their work today and spread the word about how you each can get involved in the Week Without Driving. And with that, just a super quick introduction to our speakers. We'll first hear from Anna and Ruth from Nondrivers Alliance, and then we'll get a chance to hear some local insights from three advocates from across the country whose work is closely tied to the mission of the Week Without Driving. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Anna to start sharing.
Mute myself. Hello, everyone. This is Anna Zivarts. I'm with the Nondrivers Alliance based in Seattle, Washington. And I'm just going to give you a quick intro of who we're talking about when we talk about non-drivers, because I think that's an important context to understanding where Week Without Driving came from and why we're doing this work. So quickly about me, I'm a low vision non-driver. I don't have a driver's license because I can't pass the vision test. There's a picture of me on the screen when I learned how to ride a bike when I was a little kid. And that was actually in my friend's neighborhood because we didn't have sidewalks where I lived. And I loved going over to her house where there were sidewalks and I could ride my bike. And then on the right is our logo for Week Without Driving this year, with the Nondrivers Alliance, and it's got a whole bunch of different folks with different mobilities moving. And oh my gosh, we just had the Blue Angels show up. I'm so sorry. I might have to move if it gets too loud. So non-drivers, who are we? We are people who can't drive, who can't afford to drive, who choose not to drive, who are aging out of driving, who are not old enough to drive. There's some images here on the screen representing some of the different groups I'm talking about, including people with mobility disabilities, sensory disabilities, like blindness or low vision. We have folks who are aging out of driving. That's a picture of my grandma at the bottom there. People who are too young to drive, children who are relying on the school bus, or youth who are choosing not to get a driver's license when they turn 16. There's a big increase in young people choosing not to drive when they turn 16 because of the cost associated with that, perhaps some of the anxiety and stress of driving. And then also people who can't afford to drive, right? We know if we look at who rides our buses, who walks and rolls out of necessity, there are much higher rates of non-drivers or low car ownership in low-income communities, in Black and Brown communities, in communities of recent immigrants, and in rural communities, right? Especially low-income rural communities. all across our country. Um, so I want you to think, and if you want to share this in the chat, would love to hear from you. But who do you know who is a non-driver? And how do your non-drivers in your community get where they need to go? Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone in your family, maybe it's, a friend or a neighbor, someone in a colleague, perhaps. So just reflecting on that, perhaps that you were a non-driver at a different part in your life, probably when you were a kid, but maybe as an adult too. So please share and let us know. This next statistic I share because I think it's important for us to recognize that when we talk about non-drivers, we're not talking about a small percentage of the US population. This is research that came out last fall from NRDC that found that 36.6% of people in the US do not rely on personal vehicles for daily travel needs. You can find this if you Google NRDC, who doesn't have a car. It's a good way to get to this. You can go by state or legislative district by legislative district and look at your community. Fortunately, this is just the US. This data set would love something like this for Canada. So really considering that it's a lot of people. And yet, when we think about it and when we sort of picture who needs to go places or who we consider to have valid mobility needs, in our communities, we often don't notice or don't think about non-drivers, despite non-drivers being such a huge percentage of the population. And so these are some images on the screen just of, the ways that you can start to think about or notice the non-drivers in your community, even though we are so often invisible because we're stuck at home or we're, waiting at the bus stop, walking along a rural highway. You can start to notice desire paths, the places where people have worn away the grass, walking along the sides of roads, people biking in conditions that maybe aren't, so ideal. There's someone here in the snow biking. I think this is in Minnesota last year. But just starting to notice who's biking out of necessity, who's walking and rolling and taking transit because they don't have other options. And starting to think about how do we design communities that work better for non-drivers? So that's really what we're doing here today with Week Without Driving. That's the origin story of Week Without Driving, is understanding how can we make visible non-driver access needs. That's how this began, and I'm going to hand it over to Ruth now, who's going to talk to more about what is the Week Without Driving and how you can get engaged. So I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Ruth.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. Really excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen as well. Give me 1 second. All right. So like Anna said, Week Without Driving is really focused on actually getting the needs of non-drivers out there heard, experienced, understood in many ways. This year, Week Without Driving will be October 1st through the 8th, and it's something that has existed for a while, maybe longer than you think. It started in 2021 under Disability Mobility Initiative and Disability Rights Washington, and led and created by Anna Zivarts. And it was really a way to challenge decision makers, mostly elected officials, to experience life as a non-driver. In 2023, America Walks began organizing Week Without Driving, and that's how I started doing this work nationally alongside Disability Mobility Initiative. And so part of Nondrivers Alliance is making sure that Week Without Driving is building on that foundation and making sure that we are continuing the work of ensuring that people understand non-driver experiences. And some people, may hear the term non-driver and think like, oh, well, I'm not a non-driver, so that doesn't apply to me, or, oh, may feel some kind of guilt. And that's kind of not the point. One of the big things that we established very early on is that Week Without Driving is made of a coalition. And the coalition has principles. And these principles are dignity and access to life, equitable transportation, and justice. the idea is that this coalition leads local initiatives, and they are agencies, they are local organizations, grassroots groups, committees, advocates, really like individual people who are invested or interested because maybe they're a non-driver or they know someone who is a non-driver, and or just want to be involved, and they want to, make sure that transportation choices across all communities are increased. And so these things that we came up with were, everyone deserves the freedom to get around where they need to, where they want to, and to be part of their community. And that includes non-drivers. The people who ride the bus, take the train, walk, bike, use mobility devices, anything like that, they actually know better than anyone about transportation gaps and solutions in our communities. That experience, itself on a daily basis does make you an expert. And some people can get around easily while others are left behind. And it often falls along racial and economic lines and affects people with disabilities most. And so making sure that we are on top of that and understanding that people understand that this is not just like some people can't drive and some people can. There's actually a lot of profoundness and deepness in that. Week Without Driving is a tool. It's a tool to engage elected officials and decision makers. Maybe, you get to meet somebody on a transit board and you get to pull them in and talk about Week Without Driving, or maybe an elected official you've always wanted to chat with. And so Week Without Driving is a great way to be like, show up at their office and be like, hey, there's this event coming up, and actually build a relationship with them. It's also a way to spread awareness on mobility access. A lot of people talk about their different mobility needs during the week, some things that maybe some people are very unaware of. And so this kind of shines the light on it. It's also a way to share stories and lived experience or visibilize or make sure that people understand non-drivers, right? That we know that they are there, that they exist in every community. If you know a child, you know a non-driver. And I talk about this all the time. It is so part of me to get young people and make sure that people understand that children are non-drivers and they are part of our community and they have transportation needs. Like Anna shared her story. I was also a child that had very limited mobility due to just economic lines in my family and racial lines. And it was really hard. And I felt a lot of guilt and shame actually walking to school. And I actually had a paper route and I would deliver newspaper like a newspaper girl or whatever. And it was just like, people would look at me and they would laugh at me, but I liked it. And so it was just like all these different things that we go through in life. And so making sure that people know that's, if you know children, you know a non-driver and they're part of our community and they have mobility needs and we need to recognize those. Also to diversify engagement of those in transportation. Cyclists are natural, people who come into the space, and sometimes, they may come from a different place in terms of where they came into cycling. Maybe it was because they needed to get to work, or maybe it was because they really enjoyed a certain thing, recreation. And all of that is part of like how we diversify people who engage in transportation and mobility. And also to help electeds and decision makers make better choices on transportation. Say, oh, hey, we actually want to fund transportation choices. It shouldn't all just go to building highways and things like that. It should also go to maybe making sure that our bike lanes are safe, that they are protected, or making sure that our trains are on time, anything like that, or, buses come as they should. And so things like that, we want to make sure that we are influencing that in terms of, the way that we see it, like the way that our community sees it as non-drivers. And impact over the years, this is specifically nationally, it has grown quite a bit. In 2023, we were hoping we would get a few organizations. We got 142 local organizations, which was enormous at the time. And I remember being so excited. And then it just exponentially grew over the years. Also, we had 400 community members in 2023. And in 2025, we have over like 3,000 just signing up on our website, and their engagement, you can see it on social media and things like that. Thousands of elected and public officials have signed up as well. And so a big part of that is that outreach that local organizations do. We also do a lot of making sure that the gaps are filled, and making sure that we are reaching them through media, whether it be like print media, newspapers, a news station, things like that, or also social media. And a lot of that has been really exciting to see how it's grown over the years, and how it's more like diversified. It's, not just like on one platform, but it's on several platforms that people are writing stories and articles. There's also many more articles that have been published over the years. And so it's been really exciting to see how this has grown. And people outside of Anna and I have been like interviewed. They're on podcasts and they're talking about Week Without Driving and what it means to their communities for their elected officials to be part of it. And then also, why does it matter now? Well, non-drivers have always existed, and we want to elevate their voices explicitly as maybe funding diminishes federally, regionally, locally. As any of that happens, we want to make sure that their voices are heard. We also want to generate coverage and storytelling opportunities for the public, because, again, we've always existed. And so we want to make sure that non-drivers are around them and we want them to get to know them. We want to help others understand how mobility, transportation is connected to everything, right? If like a shift worker, has a hard time getting to their shift at night because the bus stops running at 9 p.m. Well, that food that goes to your grocery store or whatever, it actually, like needs people to be there. And those stories are really important. And also for diversified funding and sponsors and transportation in general. So it's important that we talk about it now better, sooner rather than later. And some updates for 2026. I still meet with people regularly, do one-on-ones or meet with organizations, help them understand what they can do for a week without driving, or advocates and people just want to be like, hey, what can I do in my own in my own community? What can I get involved with? How do they can share their story, maybe how they can pitch to write a local story to their local newspaper, things like that. And so I'm doing that still, and I will continue to do it. And also anything that comes with like engagement, we're continuing to do. Some of the updates are more, we're still filling in the gaps. We are doing some things more internationally. Like you'll hear Canadians and Australians have been really a big part of this. And so it's really exciting to see and grow and know that this is like, there's cyclists everywhere. There's like people, and you like get to connect and be like, wow, it's so cool. We all, no matter borders or whatever, we all share like passions and stories. And we are also doing some like oh my gosh, why can't I remember the name? Some prizes at the end of the year. We're doing superlatives this year. And so people will get to nominate some elected local officials who've done really interesting things. And we'll get prizes to them. And we think this is a good way to get like local officials interested and be like, oh, okay, what is this about? And what is this prize about? And what does it mean for my community? And so those are some of the things we've been doing. We've been doing outreach also to gap states. We know that, as you saw, not every state is filled. There's local organizations everywhere, but elected officials and public officials and community members are not from every state. And so we're making sure that we get those states in as well to make sure that those communities are represented. And so that's one big thing that we've been trying to do. And also understanding like our reach and where we're at and where we're missing to make sure that voices aren't going unheard. And so those are some of the things that we're doing this year, besides a few other things. But I really appreciate your time. If you want to talk to me, that's my email. And thank you so much.
That was perfect. Absolutely beautiful, Anna and Ruth. Excellent job. This next portion of the call will be us talking and hearing from advocates and community organizers who are aligned with this work. And I've loved hearing in the chat from different people who themselves are non-drivers. And so I think I'd like to kick this part off hearing from Cheryl as a non-driver herself.
Yeah, sure. So, hello everyone. My name's Cheryl Villetard. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, up in Canada, and I was born with an eye condition, and so my disability means I can't drive, similar to Anna. And so that's made me really passionate about advocating for transportation options. I've helped set up a transportation or a transit advocacy group here in Edmonton, and then I'm also currently vice chair with a group called Paths for People. And we are a volunteer-run nonprofit that works to make Edmonton a friendlier place to walk, roll, and cycle. So we focus on pedestrian and cyclist focused advocacy. And yeah, so I guess as a non-driver, I've connected with Anna's story a lot when you talk about kind of the different emotions that come up as a non-driver, the burden of asking for rides or you know, trip planning can be really complex, all these different pieces. And so I think initiatives like Week Without Driving is really important to allow, especially elected officials to try it out and be able to, the message sticks better when people are able to experience that emotional connection themselves of, walking on a sidewalk and then just being spilled into traffic or, their bus not showing up, all those things, the message really sticks more when they're able to experience that. So, yeah, I think that this initiative helps people see what it's like to be a non-driver in a more in-depth way than just advocates talking to them about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Ruth said something really cool, and I can't quote it exactly, but something about how cyclists, people on bikes, are just really natural messengers for this kind of work. And I think I'd like to encourage Tom to go next to talk about kind of his week without driving experience.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Tom. I write Seattle Bike Blog, and so I've been following Week Without Driving since it started. It's in Seattle with Anna, and as someone who bikes everywhere, and I already don't own a car, it's kind of like cheating Week Without Driving because I do it anyway. Um, but so I had an idea this time uh, to kind of consider like there's people there's a lot of disability comes in so many different forms. There's a lot of people who uh, can drive but cannot bike. There's a lot of people who can bike but cannot drive, and then there's a lot of people who cannot do both. And so I thought, well, what would it be like if I did a week without biking, since that's what I usually get around by bike. Um, and I immediately found myself coming up with all these excuses like, well, I couldn't possibly do that because I have to get the kid to school. How would I get groceries? And I realized, like, as I'm thinking these excuses for why I couldn't do it, that these are excuses I hear all the time when people say, are confronted with the idea of like, maybe you should try not driving. um, they immediately go into all these reasons why they couldn't possibly not drive a car. And I realized I'm doing the same thing. So I committed myself to do a whole week of without biking, and it became very apparent to me how often I'm using the bike to fill in gaps in like the transit network. I'm in Seattle, which has pretty good transit network, and even here, there's so many trips where they're so much faster by bike than by bus, and so much more reliable. Like I had a to go to Tacoma, and it's a half hourly bus, which is pretty good. That's pretty fast. But both times there and back, I like saw the bus leave like as I was walking up, and I just kind of thinking about how, yeah, when you're relying on transit, and when I'm on a bike, I just hop on the bike and I immediately just go, and I know exactly how long it's going to take. And when you're relying on transit, sometimes there's just like a half hour gets punched into your day, and there's nothing you can do about it. Sometimes there's an hour gets punched into your day, um, and that you have to plan around that. And Yeah, so it was really enlightening experience to me. Uh, it was hard because the bike is such a source of pleasure and fun for me. It's what I do as a hobby. It's what I do. It makes me happy. Um, Watching Week Without Driving, it's really interesting how many people discover biking through it because it's just for all these same reasons I'm listing. If they look up their trip and there's it would take 2 or 3 transfers to get there, or they could just bike. I mean, biking is just going to be such an obvious option if you're able to do that. And so, I've definitely noticed like people who start Week Without Driving, like, all right, I'm gonna try biking, and then Week Without Driving ends, and they're still biking because they like it. You find this thing that's really enjoyable. So it was hard for me to like lose that part of my week. um, Something I really look forward to doing. Um, but it was also one of those things where you find, you know, joy in understanding your city better, by committing to using the bus for trips where I normally wouldn't. And so I ended up really enjoying the experience. um, but I think it was enlightening, um, in a lot of really, I guess, powerful ways that have sort of stuck with me, going forward. And I actually suggest, since this is a League of American Bicyclists call, there's probably a lot of people who bike everywhere. I don't know, give it a try. I mean, a week is kind of a long time, not gonna lie, but give it a try. Because it's interesting. I mean, it just it turns a place that you are living every day into kind of a completely different place, when you have to look at it, how you get around it differently. And it gives you a lot more uh, understanding of other people's experiences. And also, I think you'll be surprised how fun it can be.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, you know, it's all about perspective shift, I think, at the core, understanding other people's experiences of the world. So I'd love to hear from Shirley next. Tell us all about your work.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am Cheryl Villetard, the Creative Civic Engagement Associate at Public Matters. We've been working in LA for over 20 years, specifically in East Los Angeles for the past 15 years. Um, the East LA is a historically under-resourced area, and it's fairly big for it being unincorporated. It's about 7.4 square miles. Um, and kind of like the rest of Los Angeles, people think everyone drives. Um, and that's the only way to get around. But in East LA, there's about 11.6% of households that are non-drivers, and compared to the county where it's 9%. And so there's a large amount of non-drivers in East LA. And unfortunately, the motor vehicle collisions involving pedestrians in East LA occur almost twice at the rate of Los Angeles County. So there's a lot of um, disadvantages. There's not enough tree canopy. There's insufficient street furniture, bus shelters, bike lanes, all of those amenities kind of very limited in the community. And so we decided to uplift a story of a young man who is not a driver. And so he's a skater, and that's how he gets around his neighborhood. And we wanted to work with specifically a a young filmmaker and a young person who has decided they will not drive even though they can. And they're about 20. Um, and to work also with the local organization in the making who also hosts our 323 Farmers Market. Just for the cross promotion, again, they work a lot with youth. And so a lot of them are non-drivers, and some of them rely on the bus, some of them rely on their parents to get around or have to figure out themselves how to get around. And so it was really cool to work with these two young adults and try to bring their story to light and see how he specifically tries to get around. I'll share the video so that people can see it. Um, oh, in addition to that, because LA is car-centric, but there are a lot of organizations that um, are doing bike and walk advocacy. And so thanks to the help of Alex Ramirez from Los Angeles Walks, she got us all together and to kind of make sure that we were all on the same page for a week without driving and making sure that we were promoting each other's events. And how can we continue this? I think October is also Pedestrian Safety Month. And so how can we use this as a launching pad for the rest of the month together? Um, we also used that week as a launching pad for the Boo Boo Bandage Brigade Bonanza, which was an artful, community-driven action to heal everyday ouchies in downtown LA. There's a lot of broken sidewalks, missing curb ramps, and other hazards. We were building momentum for long-term fixes that are getting fixed now, about a couple of months later, and that's in coalition with Public Matters, Fast and Detail A, Los Angeles Walks, and Cal Life. And so we were very busy during the week without driving, trying to make sure that we were getting as many people um, to drive and even using it as a way to get these infrastructure changes happen in downtown LA.
Awesome. That was great. I love that you each kind of bring, I don't know, your own community experience to this call. So just a quick thank you all for being here. So this next part of the call is just kind of a Q&A. I'll ask some questions that are on top of my mind, and I'd like to invite the audience to submit your questions as well. Feel free to direct them to a particular panelist or just pitch them to everyone. So my first question is actually, it comes out of what you were just talking about, Shirley, and it's making me wonder about how, kind of how to translate the data, like the information you get from the week without driving into the hands of the people making the decisions about, what sidewalks to fix and things like that. So I'd be curious to know what that looks like. If any of you have experience with kind of summarizing that information from a week without driving and sending it off to decision makers. Maybe like a bike audit is what comes to my mind. That's something we love.
This is Anna. I can jump in
Yeah.
because we have been organizing here in Washington State for a long time. And um, I would say, yeah, I mean, definitely like doing walk events with people so they get that info. I think what was interesting for us is that when we started Week Without Driving, because it was started really in the depths of the pandemic, we came up with the idea almost because was something that elected officials could do on their own. Like, because the intention was that they would experience their own commutes and rhythms and places they needed to go, as if they couldn't drive, which is the experience of many of their constituents. And so, in some ways, it's that like being out there on the road at the bus stop where it's dark and there's no one else around, and if they're actually willing to really do that part of Week Without Driving, that's the part that we've heard the most about. It's like those moments when they're like, wow, this really doesn't work. I can't believe people have to do this every day, or do this with their kids, or do this, when it's raining, and seeing those gaps and those failures that we've heard oftentimes. Then, when they've come to be our allies in pieces of, getting funding or supporting policies that would make it easier to walk, roll, bike, take transit places, it was those individual experiences that have really stuck with them, and that they reference when they are sharing why they have, supported or are choosing to support a change. So um, that's something that I think we've noticed here.
Gotcha. So it's less about data and more about the experiential part of it. Cheryl, yeah. I see you unmuted. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I was just going to add a little tidbit in. It's not related to a Week Without Driving campaign per se, but our organization has run crowdfunding campaigns. So we've done two rounds over the last kind of 10 years, I guess, where we get the community to submit through a form missing links. So it's our missing links campaign. And so that's, crosswalks that are missing or curb cuts or sidewalks or bike lanes or whatever it is. And it's actually garnered lots of media attention, and city administration loves it because we're collecting all those pieces for them. And the community loves being able to be heard and feel seen in their experiences. So if anyone's curious on how to run a Missing Links campaign, I'd be happy to chat offline about it. But yeah, that's been a cool way to collect data around where the links are missing in the city.
Very cool. Anyone else want to chime in before I ask my next question, Shirley?
Yeah, for the Boo Boo Bandage Brigade, we were working with a bunch of different groups in downtown LA to collect ouchies and map them out within the downtown LA area. We, so like 6 blocks that we initially started collecting, and got over like 80 ouchies for just those small blocks. Um, and that was again in coalition with all of the DTLA groups, because each group had already done their own map. And so we just combined them together, and handed them over to the city, and the planning commissioner has been using them. And now through that, some of those ouchies have been in repair. Um, I, I think a couple of weeks ago was the first ouchie that it was like a 3 foot hole. Um, and it's deep, and people have tripped over it. It's in front of a bar, so super dangerous. And they finally were able to cover it over. But because they've seen the amount of ouchies that there are, they've been able to allocate funding for that through Lonnie, a different group who is now working to cover those. And it is a lot of crowdsourcing of like working with these other groups to making sure that we collect all of this data, the photos, the locations, and we're gonna even start working with Serve Robotics because they have their own mapping tool as well that they use for their robots, because their robots cannot access certain businesses because there's no curb ramps. And so that all to help everyone else.
That's so cool. And I love how creative the little ouchies idea is. I think that's really, really neat. Yeah, Ruth, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think and this is something similar to what Sandy in the comment section said about how relying on public transit and the loss of a schedule control is huge. And when I heard Cheryl and then Shirley say things about the missing link, one of the things that we noticed, and this is like obviously purely not from like a data, but like story collection, because that is also a form of data, is that like the missing link sometimes of like, oh, this part is actually really hard to transition, like on a bus, for example, or this part is really hard on my bike because it will be a long stretch of road without a protected bike lane. That can deter people from using some, like a different transportation option. And so those missing links don't just appear in infrastructure in that way, but they also appear in ways that we see as something like that is accessible, but also something that is safe for people to use. We also know that, and this is like research that has been done, that women tend to do many more link trips. They link trips like, oh, I have to go to the grocery store and then I have to go here, and they do it more and like pick up the kids, kind of thing. And so if one of those trips is like harder for them to do, then they're not going to want to do it in a different transportation. Like if driving is going to be the easiest way, right? Because you're you're relying on public transit, and your public transit is actually not on time, and you don't have control of your schedule, that's going to throw the whole thing off. So through the stories that we've been told and we like collect and we hear, that's also one of the big like links, missing links that we end up hearing and seeing. So these things actually end up becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is like why we know that sometimes relying on a car is easier, or why we hear other people being like, oh, it's going to be really hard for me to not take, use a car, for example. And so those are some of the things that we want to make sure that we share with people, that we know that those are the things that they might encounter. And when I talk to them, we know that that is like a, and they might not even know it until they see it for themselves. So that's just something that, as you all were talking, it kind of reminded me of like how that's in and of itself is also data for us to understand, and for lawmakers and decision makers to understand, or planners, right? As it might not just be like certain infrastructure, it might also actually be like linkages of roads that are unsafe for cyclists.
Absolutely. Well said. My next question is kind of ties into what Anna was saying about how the first week without driving was, part of the pandemic, really. So, I'm assuming that you've all learned a lot since your first week without driving, whether, speaking from you as a person experiencing a week without driving, or you as a person trying to organize an event around week without driving. But if you could go back in time to your first non-driving experience of so your first week without driving, really. What advice would you give yourself? And with keeping in mind, how could this advice help other people, like first timers interested in doing this kind of week without driving experience? I'll tag someone. Ruth, do you wanna take this one?
Yeah, I think one of the big things, I grew up in the boonies. There was no, literally the county I grew up in was called Boone County, or is called Boone County. There's no public transit. They still don't have a public transit system. And everybody, as soon as you're 15, you start learning how to drive. As soon as you're, 16, you start learning, you get your driver's license. That's like a big thing. And so for me, I remember thinking that driving was like my freedom. Like it was like the time that I was going to be able to do this. And there's been a few things in my life that have changed. Economically, I became a non-driver when I moved to Chicago. I couldn't afford to keep my car. It was too expensive. And so it was too hard. It just became too difficult. And then I started relying on like, our commuter rail and learning how to like take, a bike and things like that. And it was really difficult. And now I have epilepsy. And so I am like a non-driver because of something else. And I think like what I would tell myself is that your like life is not a line. Like you don't, it's not like you become a driver and then you're just gonna always be a non-driver or a driver, right? There's been times where like I've like broken my foot, or like things like that, or like damaged my foot, like and I can't drive, or I didn't have access to my car, or I lent my car to somebody else and I had to rely on other modes of transportation. And so I think like that's one big thing that narratively people like understand, but they don't really always get it, is like there's going to be times in life where you may not be able to drive, and learning and understanding like your transit, like your outside system, and learning maybe how to get around by bike or like by bus or things like that are helpful just in general in life. And also like they're just gonna be like good for you. And so I remember being really scared to ride the bus, and I rode it with Chicago, and so but I remember being like really excited but like scared. And she was like, "Oh, it's just what you do." And I was like, "Oh." And so I wish that like I would have known that before, like kind of thinking that it was like hard, or like thinking like all these like kind of like negative things that had been kind of in my scope. So that's just one big thing that like I wish I could tell myself, that life is not linear and you'll go through many things, and it's okay to be scared, but like there's going to be people around that help you. And so yeah, I think for us, like, yeah, happy to help in any way.
this is Anna. I can jump in. And I mean, building off what Ruth has shared, I think it is really, for me, the most impactful thing about doing this work. And the Week Without Driving is a way to really highlight this, is for people to realize that if they can't drive, they're not alone, and that there are many other people out there with similar experiences. And, I grew up in a rural part of the state, no transit access. I think Cheryl, when we chatted, that was your experience as well. And you feel like you are the only person when everyone else turns 16 and gets their license. That's not an option. And so recognizing that there are so many other people out there in rural communities, in cities, for economic reasons, for people unable to get oh my gosh, a valid license for other reasons, like those are all non-drivers, and that there's actually way more of us out there, and we can build community. And it's also something that, is cyclical in people's lives, right? You start as a non-driver, maybe you're a non-driver in other parts of your life in the middle, and definitely by the end of your life, for many people, they age out of driving safely as well. So I also, just while I'm off mute, wanted, if Shirley, if you have a link to the Boo Boo Bandage Brigade, I was looking for one because it's such a cool campaign, and I remember seeing images of it. Okay, yes, there we go. Yeah, I remember seeing images of it last year and just being like, the visuals are brilliant. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, Tom, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think that my advice for someone who's just getting into this is to have like a very open mind and, you know, be receptive to learning things that you weren't expecting to encounter. Like one thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and I thought a lot about while reading Anna's book, When Driving Is Not an Option, which everyone should read this book. It's so good. And, thinking about how many people there are who are at home and they stay home not because they want to, but because like the transportation is just too much of a headache that it's just easier I'll just stay inside today. In a city, a community, it's not like it's not the infrastructure, the city is not an infrastructure. The city is the people that are in it, and how like our whole community is harmed and loses out on uh, experiencing each other when people stay inside because of this transportation barriers, and like that harms everyone, that harms the whole city. And so I kind of think of it as like the flip side of Week Without Driving is like a really cool open streets event where it is very accessible, and the cars are removed from streets and people can come out and just enjoy community together. And you see so many more people with disabilities at these events than you do on just like in like a normal day. And I wonder how much of that is just like, yeah, I mean, because it's like this inviting thing, like, yes, this is a reason to come out, and this is going to be an accessible event, and everyone is welcome to be here, and we can all celebrate together, and just like, so yeah, I think that's been one of the things I've been thinking a lot about. That is maybe not a conclusion I expected to draw initially going into this, doing like Week Without Driving events. So.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, Cheryl, I see you.
I was just going to add a couple little things. Um, like Tom mentioned, I think it's just a shift in perspective and having that open mind. And I think people just need to get more used to, planning their trips. Like, I think when you're a driver and you can just hop in your car and go, and there's a million routes you could take to get to where you need to go. And so just shifting that perspective to be like, oh, right, I need to take a moment to plan where I'm going, then it becomes easier. And then the other two things I wanted to mention was just for folks to let go of like the guilt or shame that can come up around it. So, if you're trying it for a week and then you're saying, oh, like it's really hard, I can't get to this one place, or I need to get really heavy groceries, removing that shame of like taking an Uber. Uh, it's okay to do once in a while and do what you need to do to get around. And then also asking for help and finding community. So I just wanted to share, about 5 years ago, I really wanted to get into cycling and I was super nervous about it. So I did lots of research online, and then I was able to find like a local group that gets together for social rides in our city, and showing up there and being like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just here to learn and have fun. And it gave me the confidence to be able to ride around, signal, all those little details using my shifts, and really helped me get into it and feel confident. So finding that community, I think, can be really helpful in getting started.
Absolutely. I think that that really kind of answers the next question I'm about to kind of pitch to everyone, but I think it's important. So I'm gonna go through it. Steve says that he says, I try to bike or walk whenever I can, but I've always been intimidated when Week Without Driving comes around because it feels like it's all or nothing, even though I know it isn't. Can you share the next level down of your publicity that discusses how you should participate, even if it's not 100%, or that somehow you haven't failed, even if you do end up driving? Yeah, I just love some kind of reactions to that.
It's interesting, this is Anna. When I first started talking about Week Without Driving with my mom, they live in a rural area, and she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna bike everywhere." And then, it's really not safe. And I started thinking a lot about like, gosh, this shouldn't be like a measure of your toughness, right? Like, or some sort of commitment test, right, to active transportation. The reality is that most of our communities are super car dependent, and it's really hard. It's often takes longer, feels less safe, can be totally physically impossible to get somewhere not in a car. And so for those of us who can't drive, that often means asking for rides or sometimes paying for rides. But and so recognizing all of that, when people are being asked to participate in Week Without Driving, we really want them to just consider for a second what options are, right? And that's really the first step, is like, okay, if I suddenly couldn't drive for whatever reason, how would I make this work? Like, who would I call for a ride? How would I feel about that? What would I have to maybe exchange, offer them in exchange for that favor? And that first level of contemplation. And I'll share one quick story. I think it was the first or second year we did Week Without Driving. After the fact, we were doing exit interviews with elected officials who had participated. And one elected official who had signed up, when I reached out to him, to do the interview, he was like, I don't know if I should do the interview. I totally failed. And I was like, no, let's talk, let's talk. And he described how, the week before, his wife had been diagnosed with a medical condition, and she had to go to a bunch of specialists, and he needed to be able to take her. And when he started thinking about it, like, none of these specialist offices were located anywhere near transit. And so he drove. And he said, as he was sitting there, like in the parking lot, waiting for her at these appointments, had this, recognition that, wow, it really, like, what would someone do who didn't have a car and needed to go see these specialists? Like, how would they get there? And as a member of, the county council that was, deciding where transit goes and how it gets funded, became a really strong advocate for more connected and better transit service, especially to some of these locations that, while they weren't major hospitals, were also like critical parts of our healthcare network. So, yeah, we don't, it's not like a litmus test. I know, I'm sure Ruth has other ways of framing this as well, because it's something we hear a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way. And I think like one of the big things that we tell people, and one of our phrases for the past 2 years was, it's about reflection. And somebody said it's about reflection, not perfection. And so one of the big things that we try to really emphasize on for a week without driving, that it's like the period that you spend reflecting is actually really like the most important part, more than like being like, I did it 100%, and then you don't reflect at all, or you live in like the most amazing like walkable area, and you get all your groceries like delivered, and it's like, that's awesome, that's great, but like not knowing that everybody like has that. And that's like when the perspective shift that Cheryl talked about, it's like having that be the motivating factor of like, oh, there's people in my community, and like not only people, like, there's all of these people that I may come in contact with, or like care about, and they don't tell me, or like children that are, that like are in the school near me, or like just kind of thinking about that, or the fact like I have, aging parents, or I know I have aging grandparents, and what will that look like? That's like the real shift that comes into mind, and thinking about like, what is my community supporting? What happens when we get to age in place, and what happens when we don't? What is our community asking of us? And so that's one of the big things I think that we really strive for, is that reflection piece of like getting people to think and take the time. And like Tom wrote like an awesome article about like, what is the, like, what does this mean? And so I really think like that to us is like the most important part. And I apologize if it hasn't been, something that we've like talked about enough. And I have thought like, how do we do it more during like our social media pieces, or when we reach out, to make sure that people don't feel like oh, there's this big thing that's looming over me and I feel like I should do it, or like moral superiority or anything like that. Because really it's more about like, yeah, thinking and taking the time. And if you share it or you don't, like that's totally okay. Like there's definitely no need, and there's no like, we don't go and say like, oh, did you do it, how did you do it, or anything like that on our end. So definitely don't count on that. But if you want to, and you do end up like thinking or sharing and reflecting and sharing your story, it may reach more people than you think, and it might make more noise to other people than you may think. And that's something that we really told people as well. Like sometimes your own experience actually makes like more of an impact on others than we may initially realize. And so I think like that's one big thing that like I'll just say, like somebody said on here like, oh, we really need to normalize not driving. Like I used to be that person that was like, I'll just bike there, and my friends would be like, no, no, no. And one friend was like, okay, I'm gonna bike with you, Ruth. And she like spent the whole day biking, and she was like, I get why you bike everywhere now, because she like really fell in love with it, and it was just like very fun. Like I was like, it's so fun, sometimes not, but like sometimes it's really fun, and you get to like see cool things, and I would point out different things that I've noticed in the city. And so those are the kind of stories that we want to see and hear, and like hopefully you also get to reflect on it during Week Without Driving.
That's such a good note to end this on. We've got just 2 minutes left. So yeah, just to kind of wrap up and say, I want to thank everyone who's been active in the chat talking about their experiences with non-driving, whether it's themselves or their neighbors. I think it's really important. I'm not sure which one of you said it, but just the representation, the knowing that you're not alone, that people do this every day, and we know it's hard, but we do it and we can make our communities better, and more accessible for everyone. Um, and just a quick plug for the league. We have our request for proposals for our next summit up and running. So if you have an idea for a panel or a session that talks about, accessibility, disability, intersections of these topics with bikes, please feel free to submit your ideas. We'd love to hear them. Yeah, I think that's all we have time for today. So just another quick thank you. Thank you to our awesome speakers. Let's give a little round of applause for all of them. Thank you all so much. And yeah, have a great rest of your day. And you'll get the recording and the slides and stuff like that. It'll come to your email. All right. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.